Since John Schneider and Pete Carroll first arrived in 2010, the Seahawks have only used 2 draft picks on quarterbacks, Russell Wilson back in 2012 and Alex Magoo in 2017. This is something that Schneider recently has regretted, wishing that he would have picked more quarterbacks like the Green Bay Packers, his former employer, have done over the years, adding competition, developing players behind Russell Wilson. They didn't get to do that. Magoo was able to be with the Seahawks for a couple of seasons in training camp, but never did enough to make the roster and be a backup on game day. And otherwise, they haven't really made any efforts to go out and draft a quarterback. They did briefly have Trevon Boykin for a couple seasons, an undrafted rookie out of TCU, before legal issues led to his release. But otherwise, it has been a position for the most part they have avoided. And a big part of that has been the reliability and the durability of Russell Wilson. Up until this last season, had never missed a regular season start. He was Iron Man and one of the best quarterbacks in the league, making 9 Pro Bowls in 10 seasons. They haven't had to worry about that. But now with Russell Wilson in Denver after being traded last month, the Seahawks are closely looking at this year's quarterback class. It's not one that's been touted very highly by most draft experts, but nonetheless, let's look at the Seahawks draft thresholds at quarterback. Obviously, because they've only picked 2 players, it's a pretty limited sample size, but let's look back at Russell Wilson and Alex Magoo's testing before their respective drafts first. Russell Wilson was one of the more athletic quarterbacks at the 2012 NFL draft. Big question mark, of course, 5'11". That was confirmed when he was measured. Sub 6 foot prior to Russell Wilson. That was usually a death sentence for quarterbacks in terms of success in the NFL. But he had 10.25-inch hands, big hands for a man of his size. Ran a 4.55 40-yard dash, also a sub 7-second 3-cone, a pretty quick 4.09-second short shuttle, and respectable vertical and broad jump numbers. As for Alex Magoo, he was not invited to the 2017 NFL Combine, but still posted some decent numbers at Florida International's Pro Day, a 4.62 40-yard dash, 7.27-second 3-cone, a little slower in the short shuttle at 4.5 seconds, 32.5 vertical, 112-inch broad jump. So decent numbers, not quite the athlete that Russell Wilson was coming out of Wisconsin, but still, Magoo would have stacked up fairly well against the other quarterbacks that were at the Combine entering that 2017 NFL draft. So what does that mean for the Seahawks going into this year's draft class? Well, unfortunately, compared to a lot of positions with that small sample size, probably doesn't mean too much heading into this draft when you only have 2 players to compare to. And you also have to consider that this year, for whatever reason, most of the top quarterbacks have not done testing going into the draft. They didn't run at the Combine and didn't run at their respective pro days. They did what they felt they needed to do, and that was throw in front of teams. And you had guys like Sam Howell that were coming off of some injuries and decided not to participate in the running for that reason. And so trying to look at these thresholds, most positions going into this draft, there will be some clues which type of players the Seahawks will be looking at. It's a little bit tougher to peg that down when you consider the sheer number of quarterbacks, though, that didn't do any testing this year at the Combine or at their pro day. As you can see, all of the categories that are in green, that means they meet the Seahawks threshold. And again, that's just based off of 2 players, Russell Wilson and Alex Magoo. D'Eriq King at 5'9", 196 pounds. I think we can rule him out as a quarterback the Seahawks are going to have interest in. As far as hand size goes, E.J. Perry and Kenny Pickett, this has been well documented. Pittsburgh's quarterback has small hands for the position. Both of them would not meet Seattle's prior hand size thresholds. As for the 40-yard dash, the ones that actually ran at the Combine, the only one that would meet Seattle's threshold is Desmond Ridder at 4.52 seconds. I think Seattle would consider somebody like E.J. Perry at 4.65 seconds or even Pickett at 4.73. That's still a fairly athletic quarterback. But again, just 2 players. Alex Magoo at 4.62 seconds is the slowest quarterback that John Schneider has drafted during his time in Seattle. Every quarterback that tested would have met the short shuttle threshold, 3-cone aside from Caleb Eleby from Western Michigan. Every quarterback that participated in that drill would have met the threshold as well. In the explosives, you have a number of players that didn't meet the vertical or broad jump. I don't know how much that would play into the evaluation for John Schneider and Pete Carroll, but certainly they're always looking for explosive athletes. You do have players like Kenny Pickett and Desmond Ridder, who posted pretty solid numbers in both the vertical and the broad jump, along with having pretty solid athletic testing in terms of quickness and speed. So there are some intriguing names here. Unfortunately, based off of the lack of data that we have, it's tough to put a finger on which player the Seahawks could potentially tab as the replacement and the heir apparent for Russell Wilson. You don't have Malik Willis, Matt Corral, Sam Howell. Those three, none of them did any testing. So all of your evaluations can be based off of what you've seen on film and meetings that you've had with that respective player. Malik Willis and Sam Howell, as well as Corral, all three of them reportedly met with the Seahawks at the Combine in Indianapolis. So the Seahawks have done their due diligence. They had representatives at all of the pro days for these top 5 quarterbacks as well. So there's a lot more that goes into this. And with, again, such a small sample size, difficult to know how much bearing that's going to have on the type of quarterback that the Seahawks could select in this year's draft. But there are some very intriguing athletes in this group. You would think Seattle's going to be looking for a dual threat quarterback in a similar mold to Wilson, at least in this year's draft class. That is one of the strengths for this group. You have a lot of options that do bring some versatility with the ability to throw and run the football to do damage with their legs.